Sarah Martinez had always been different from other women her age. At 28, she carried herself with a confidence that made people look twice. Her dark hair was pulled back in a simple ponytail, and she wore jeans and a plain t-shirt like any other tourist visiting the Naval Base Museum in San Diego. But there was something in her eyes, something that spoke of experiences most people could never imagine. The trouble started when she accidentally bumped into a group of young sailors near the SEAL Memorial Wall. Her coffee spilled slightly, and as she reached for napkins, one of the sailors noticed something that made his face twist with anger. "Hey, look at this," the sailor called out to his friends, pointing at Sarah's exposed forearm. There, clearly visible beneath her rolled-up sleeve, was a tattoo that made the young men's blood boil. It was the distinctive SEAL trident, the sacred symbol of the Navy SEALs, inked in black against her pale skin. The sailor who spotted it first was Petty Officer Jake Morrison, barely 22 and fresh from basic training. He had dreamed of becoming a SEAL his entire life but had failed the rigorous selection process twice. Seeing what he believed was a civilian woman wearing the symbol he desperately wanted to earn felt like a personal insult. "Ma'am, I think you need to explain something," Jake said, stepping closer to Sarah with his chest puffed out. His voice carried the authority he thought his uniform gave him, though his inexperience showed in the slight tremor of anger. Sarah looked up from cleaning her spilled coffee, confused by the sudden confrontation. She had been enjoying a peaceful morning at the museum, reading about naval history, and remembering old friends. The last thing she expected was trouble from a group of young sailors who looked like they were barely old enough to shave. "Is there a problem?" she asked calmly, her voice steady despite the growing crowd of onlookers. She had learned long ago not to let anger show in her voice, especially when dealing with younger military personnel who might be looking for a fight. "That tattoo," Jake pointed accusingly at her arm. "You can't just wear that. Do you have any idea what that symbol means? People die earning the right to wear that. It's not some fashion statement you picked up at a tattoo parlor because you thought it looked cool." His friends gathered around, nodding in agreement. Word spread quickly through the museum, and more sailors and Marines began to gather. The crowd grew larger as people heard whispers about a civilian woman disrespecting military symbols. Some pulled out their phones, ready to record what they expected would be a satisfying confrontation with someone they assumed was pretending to be something she wasn't. Sarah felt the familiar tightness in her chest that came with being misunderstood, but she had faced worse situations than this. She had learned to choose her battles carefully, and getting into an argument with emotional young sailors in a public place wasn't worth the trouble it would cause. Still, something about the boy's arrogance reminded her of her younger brother, and she felt a protective instinct kick in. "I understand you're upset," she said quietly, making no move to cover the tattoo. "But I think there might be some confusion here." "Confusion?" Jake laughed, but it wasn't a pleasant sound. "Lady, there's no confusion. That's a SEAL trident on your arm, and unless you're about to tell me you're secretly a Navy SEAL, which would be impossible since women weren't even allowed in combat roles when you would have served, you're wearing something you have no right to wear." The crowd murmured in agreement. Several people began filming with their phones, expecting to capture a viral moment of military justice. Sarah noticed an older Marine sergeant watching from the edge of the crowd, his eyes thoughtful rather than angry, but he made no move to intervene. "I don't want any trouble," Sarah said, her voice remaining calm despite the growing hostility around her. "I'm just here visiting the museum like everyone else." "Then you can start by explaining why you're disrespecting our brothers, who earned that symbol," Jake pressed, emboldened by the support of his friends and the growing crowd. "Some of us have tried and failed to earn that. Others have friends who died earning it, and you're just walking around wearing it like it's jewelry." Sarah looked around at the faces surrounding her. She saw anger, disappointment, and judgment. But also something else, in some of the older faces. Something that looked almost like recognition. She had spent years learning to read people, to understand what they were really thinking behind their expressions, and she sensed that not everyone in the crowd was as certain as the young sailors that she was simply a pretender. The situation escalated when Jake reached out as if to grab her arm to get a better look at the tattoo. Sarah's reflexes, honed by years of training most people couldn't imagine, kicked in automatically. She stepped back smoothly, her movement so fluid and controlled that Jake stumbled slightly when he met empty air instead of her arm. "Don't touch me," she said. And for the first time, there was steel in her voice that made several people in the crowd step back instinctively. It wasn't the voice of an angry civilian. It was the voice of someone accustomed to being obeyed without question. Someone who had faced real danger and commanded respect through actions rather than words. But Jake was too angry and embarrassed by his stumble to recognize the warning in her tone. He straightened up and moved closer again, his friends flanking him in a show of support that was more about male pride than military honor. "You think you can just walk around here disrespecting everything we stand for?" he demanded, his voice rising. "You think because you're a woman, nobody's going to call you out on your lies?" "I haven't lied about anything," Sarah replied, her patience finally beginning to thin. "And I haven't disrespected anyone. You're the one making assumptions about things you don't understand." The crowd pressed closer, drawn by the drama and the promise of seeing someone get their comeuppance. Phone cameras captured every word, every expression, ready to share the confrontation with the world. The museum security guards had been alerted but seemed reluctant to interfere in what appeared to be a military matter. "Then prove it," Jake challenged, his chest puffed out with the confidence of youth and righteous anger. "Tell us exactly how you earned the right to wear that tattoo. Tell us about your SEAL training, about the teams you served with, about the missions you went on. Because I'm betting you can't. And when you can't, everyone here is going to know exactly what kind of person you really are." Sarah looked at the young sailor's face, seeing her own brother at that age, full of dreams and certainty about right and wrong. She saw his friends, equally young and equally certain that they were standing up for something important. She saw the crowd, hungry for drama and validation of their own beliefs about who belonged in their world and who didn't, and she made a decision that would change everything. "You really want to know?" she asked quietly, her voice carrying clearly despite its softness. "You want to hear about the training, the missions, the things that gave me the right to wear this tattoo?" "Yeah," Jake said, crossing his arms. "I want to hear your story, and when you can't tell it because you never lived it. I want everyone here to see what happens to people who steal valor from real heroes." Sarah nodded slowly, understanding that there was no backing down now, no way to avoid the conversation she had spent years trying not to have. The weight of old memories pressed down on her shoulders. But she straightened under their burden, drawing on strength that had carried her through situations far more dangerous than this one. "All right," she said, her voice growing stronger. "But you might not like what you hear." The crowd sensed something shifting in the dynamic of the confrontation. The woman's entire demeanor had changed, becoming somehow more substantial, more present, as if she had stopped holding something back and was allowing her true nature to show through. Jake felt it too, a subtle change in the air that made him less certain than he had been moments before. But he was committed now, surrounded by his friends and the crowd, with no way to back down without losing face. "I'm listening," he said, though his voice had lost some of its earlier confidence. Sarah took a deep breath, feeling the familiar weight of secrets she had carried for so long that they had become part of her bones. She looked around at the faces surrounding her, knowing that everything was about to change. Not just for her, but for everyone who had made assumptions about who she was and what she had done with her life. The moment stretched between them like a taut wire, full of tension and possibility, while somewhere in the crowd, an older man in an admiral's uniform pushed through the gathering, drawn by reports of a disturbance involving military symbols and stolen valor. He moved with purpose, ready to settle the matter quickly and decisively, having no idea that he was about to witness something that would challenge everything he thought he knew about the limits of what was possible. Sarah closed her eyes for a moment, and when she opened them, she was no longer the quiet museum visitor who had been enjoying a peaceful morning. The woman who faced the crowd now carried herself with the unmistakable bearing of someone who had seen combat, who had made life and death decisions under pressure, who had earned her place among warriors through blood and sacrifice. "My name is Sarah Martinez," she began, her voice clear and steady. "And before you decide what I have or haven't earned the right to wear, you should know that I spent 8 years in a program that officially never existed." The crowd shifted restlessly. This wasn't the stammering denial they had expected. Jake felt his confidence wavering but pressed forward anyway. What program? Women weren't allowed in special operations. Everyone knows that. Sarah almost smiled at his certainty. You're right. Women weren't officially allowed. But sometimes, when the mission requires it, official policies become less important than getting the job done. Sometimes, you need someone who can go places men can't go. Do things men can't do. Blend in where men would stand out like neon signs. She paused, letting her words sink in before continuing. In 2003, a year after I graduated from college with a degree in Arabic Studies and International Relations, I was recruited by a joint task force that needed female operators for missions in Iraq and Afghanistan, places where male soldiers couldn't go without causing international incidents or getting themselves killed. The crowd had grown quieter now, sensing something different in her tone, in the way she held herself. Even Jake seemed less certain than he had been moments before. The program was called Operation Athena, Sarah continued, naming something that wouldn't appear in any public records for decades to come. 12 women were selected from various military branches and civilian backgrounds. We underwent modified SEAL training at a classified facility in Virginia. The same physical standards, the same psychological pressure, the same elimination rate that breaks most men who attempt it. Her voice grew harder as she remembered those grueling months. Of the 12 who started, 3 of us finished. 3 women who were deemed capable of operating behind enemy lines in situations where traditional special operations forces couldn't go. Jake opened his mouth to object, but Sarah continued before he could speak. My first mission was in Fallujah in 2004. Intelligence had identified a safe house where high-value targets were meeting with female family members present. Male operators couldn't get close enough for proper surveillance without raising suspicions, so they sent me in, dressed as a local woman, to plant listening devices and gather intelligence. She looked directly at Jake, her eyes holding memories he couldn't begin to imagine. I spent 3 days in that house, pretending to be a distant relative helping with domestic duties, while men who would have killed me without hesitation if they discovered who I really was planned attacks that would have killed dozens of American soldiers. The crowd was completely silent now, hanging on every word. Several older military personnel had pushed closer, their expressions shifting from skepticism to something approaching recognition. Over the next 6 years, I conducted 47 classified missions across Iraq, Afghanistan, and several other countries I'm not authorized to name even now. I've been shot twice, survived 3 IED explosions, and once spent 18 hours pinned down in a firefight while waiting for extraction. Sarah rolled up her sleeve further, revealing not just the SEAL trident but several other tattoos that told a story only those with military experience could read. There was a small memorial tattoo with dates and initials, marking fallen teammates. Another showed coordinates that wouldn't mean anything to civilians but would be instantly recognizable to anyone who had served in certain classified operations. I earned my trident the same way any SEAL earns it, she said simply. Through training that broke me down and built me back up stronger. Through missions that tested every limit I thought I had. Through sacrifices that cost me friends, relationships, and pieces of my soul that I'll never get back. Jake's face had gone pale. The righteous anger that had fueled his confrontation was evaporating, replaced by a growing realization that he had made a terrible mistake. Around him, the crowd was beginning to murmur, phones lowering as people started to understand that they weren't witnessing the exposure of a fraud, but the reluctant revelation of genuine heroism. But here's the thing about classified operations, Sarah continued, her voice taking on a bitter edge. When your service doesn't officially exist, you don't get the recognition that comes with it. No public ceremonies, no medal presentations, no acknowledgement of what you've done or what it cost you. You just go back to civilian life and pretend that the most important years of your life never happened. She looked around at the faces surrounding her, seeing the shift in their expressions as understanding dawned. So when young sailors like you see a woman wearing a SEAL trident, your first instinct is to assume she's stolen it. Because officially, no woman has ever earned one. And you're right, officially. But the real world is more complicated than official records suggest. An older Marine sergeant who had been watching from the edge of the crowd stepped forward, his weathered face serious. Ma'am, with respect, what you're describing sounds like the kind of operations that would have required Senate oversight and multiple levels of classification review. Are you saying Congress authorized female SEAL equivalents without public knowledge? Sarah met his eyes steadily. I'm saying that when American lives are at stake and traditional approaches aren't working, people find ways to get the mission done. I'm saying that sometimes the most effective operators are the ones nobody suspects, the ones who don't fit the typical profile of what a warrior looks like. She turned back to Jake, who was now looking distinctly uncomfortable under the gaze of the crowd and the weight of his mistake. You asked me to prove I earned this tattoo. I can give you operational details that would be meaningless to you but would be instantly verifiable by anyone with the proper clearance. I can tell you about training exercises at facilities you've never heard of, with instructors whose names would mean nothing to you because their service records are classified. The young sailor opened his mouth but no words came out. The confidence that had carried him through the confrontation had completely evaporated, leaving only embarrassment and the growing realization that he had publicly challenged someone whose service dwarfed his own limited experience. But more than that, Sarah continued, I can tell you that this tattoo represents 3 friends who didn't make it home from missions where I was the only female operator within 500 miles. It represents nights spent in hostile territory, with nothing but my training and my wits to keep me alive. It represents a kind of service that required me to disappear so completely that even now, 15 years later, I can't talk about most of what I did without risking prosecution. The crowd had shifted completely now. What had started as support for the young sailors had transformed into uncomfortable awareness that they had witnessed something they weren't supposed to see. Heard confessions that weren't meant for their ears. Sarah could see the change in their faces, the way they were beginning to step back, creating distance between themselves and a situation that had spiraled far beyond what anyone had anticipated. She had said too much, revealed things that were meant to stay buried, but the damage was already done. So yes, she said, her voice quieter now but carrying clearly in the sudden silence. I earned this tattoo. I bled for it, lost friends for it, and gave up years of my life that I can never get back for it. And if that's not enough proof for you, then I suggest you find someone with the clearance level to verify what I've told you. Jake stood frozen, his face burning with embarrassment and something deeper. A shame that came from realizing he had attacked someone whose service made his own limited experience seem trivial by comparison. His friends had melted away, leaving him alone to face the consequences of his assumptions and his anger. The crowd began to disperse, people walking away in small groups, their conversations hushed and uncomfortable. Phone cameras that had been recording expectantly were quietly put away, the viral moment they had expected to capture having transformed into something none of them wanted to share with the world. But as the crowd thinned, a new figure pushed through the remaining onlookers, someone whose presence would change everything once again. Admiral Robert Chen, a decorated veteran of multiple conflicts and current head of Naval Special Warfare Development, had been visiting the museum when reports of the disturbance reached him. He moved through the dispersing crowd with the purposeful stride of someone accustomed to command, his eyes already assessing the situation with the trained gaze of someone who had spent decades evaluating personnel and situations under pressure. His uniform bore the marks of genuine authority, ribbons and insignia that spoke of real combat experience and hard-earned rank. As he approached the center of the confrontation, Admiral Chen's eyes fell on Sarah, and something in her bearing, in the way she stood despite the emotional toll of her revelations, made him pause and look more carefully. There was something familiar about her, something that tugged at memories of classified briefings and operational reports that had crossed his desk years earlier. The Admiral's arrival sent a ripple through the remaining crowd. Even civilians recognized the authority he carried, and military personnel automatically straightened and moved aside to clear a path. Jake found himself standing at attention, without consciously making the decision to do so, his training overriding his emotional turmoil. Admiral Chen's gaze moved from Sarah to Jake and back again, taking in the tension between them, the scattered crowd, the phones being hastily put away. His experienced eye read the situation quickly, recognizing the signs of a confrontation that had gone in an unexpected direction. What seems to be the problem here? He asked, his voice carrying the quiet authority that came with decades of leadership. It wasn't a shout or a demand, but somehow everyone present knew that an answer was expected and that evasion wouldn't be tolerated. Jake snapped to attention, his face still flushed with embarrassment and confusion. Sir, This woman was wearing a seal trident tattoo, and when we questioned her about it, she claimed to have earned it through some classified program that doesn't exist, sir. Admiral Chen's eyes moved to Sarah, studying her with the careful attention of someone who had spent decades evaluating personnel. Something about her bearing, the way she held herself even in the aftermath of an emotional confrontation, triggered a memory that had been buried in classified files for over a decade. "Ma'am, may I see your identification?" the Admiral asked, his tone respectful but official. Sarah reached into her purse and handed over her driver's license without hesitation. Admiral Chen glanced at the name and photo, then looked back at her face with growing recognition. His expression shifted subtly, professional composure giving way to something approaching surprise. "Sarah Martinez," he said slowly, as if testing the name. "You wouldn't happen to be the Sarah Martinez who served with Task Force Athena between 2003 and 2011? The few remaining onlookers fell completely silent. Jake's mouth opened slightly. His earlier confidence completely evaporated. The crowd that had been dispersing began to edge closer again. Sensing that something significant was happening, Sarah met the Admiral's gaze steadily. "Yes, sir. I am." Admiral Chen handed her identification back, then did something that shocked everyone present. He stepped back and rendered a sharp, formal salute to the woman in civilian clothes who moments before had been accused of stolen valor. "Master Chief Martinez," he said, using a rank that made several nearby sailors gasp in surprise. "It's an honor to meet you in person. I've read your service record, all of it." The transformation in the crowd was immediate and dramatic. Master Chief was a rank that commanded instant respect throughout the Navy, representing the pinnacle of enlisted achievement. For a woman to hold that rank in special operations, even in a classified program, represented a level of accomplishment that few could even imagine. Jake's face went white as the full magnitude of his mistake hit him. He had not only confronted a legitimate veteran, but one whose rank and service record dwarfed his own limited experience. Around him, other military personnel were coming to the same realization, their expressions shifting from curiosity to profound respect and, in some cases, embarrassment at having witnessed the confrontation. Sarah returned the Admiral's salute, her civilian clothes doing nothing to diminish the military bearing that was now clearly visible to everyone present. "Thank you, sir. Though I should mention that my service record is supposed to remain classified for another 10 years. Admiral Chen nodded gravely. "Under normal circumstances, yes. But given the situation here today, I think some clarification is warranted." He turned to address the remaining crowd, his voice carrying the authority of someone accustomed to being heard and obeyed. "Ladies and gentlemen, what you've witnessed today is an unfortunate case of mistaken assumptions. Master Chief Martinez served with distinction in one of the most classified and dangerous programs in recent military history. Her service record includes multiple combat deployments, numerous commendations for valor, and contributions to missions that saved countless American lives." He paused, letting his words sink in before continuing. Task Force Athena was a highly classified joint special operations program that utilized female operators for missions where traditional male operators could not be effectively deployed. The program was authorized at the highest levels of government and operated under the strictest security protocols. The Admiral's gaze moved to Jake, who was still standing at rigid attention, his face a mask of mortification. "Petty Officer Morrison, isn't it? I believe you owe Master Chief Martinez an apology." Jake's voice came out as barely more than a whisper. "Ma'am, I'm sorry. I had no idea. I thought you were. I assumed." He stopped, unable to find words adequate for the magnitude of his mistake. Sarah looked at the young sailor, seeing her own brother in his face, remembering her own early years in service when everything seemed clear-cut and simple. "Petty Officer Morrison, you were trying to protect something you believed was sacred. That instinct is admirable, even if your execution was flawed." She stepped closer to him, her voice gentle but firm. "But you learned something important today about making assumptions. Real warriors don't always look like what you expect them to look like. Service takes many forms, and some of the most important contributions come from people who can never be publicly recognized for what they've done." Admiral Chen watched the exchange with approval, recognizing a teaching moment when he saw one. Master Chief Martinez raises an important point. The modern military operates in complex environments that require diverse capabilities. The days when warfare was simply about physical strength and traditional tactics are long gone. He addressed the broader crowd, many of whom were recording with their phones again, though now with very different intent. What happened here today should serve as a reminder that heroism doesn't always come with fanfare and public recognition. Some of our most valuable service members operate in shadows, their contributions known only to a few, their sacrifices recognized only in classified files. Sarah felt the weight of exposure, of secrets revealed that she had guarded for over a decade. She had never wanted this attention, had specifically chosen a quiet civilian life to escape the complications of her military service. But looking at the faces around her, seeing the shift from judgment to respect and understanding, she realized that perhaps some good could come from this unwanted revelation. "Petty Officer Morrison," she said, drawing Jake's attention back to her. "Your instinct to protect the integrity of military symbols was correct. But remember that the real threat to that integrity doesn't come from people like me who earned our symbols in unconventional ways. It comes from those who would cheapen military service for personal gain or political advantage." Jake nodded earnestly, his earlier arrogance completely replaced by genuine humility. "Yes, ma'am. I understand. And I really am sorry for how I approached you. I should have been more respectful, should have asked questions instead of making accusations." "We all make mistakes," Sarah replied. "The important thing is learning from them. You're young, you have potential, and you care about things that matter. Those are good qualities in a sailor. Just remember to temper them with wisdom and better judgment as you gain experience." Admiral Chen stepped forward again, his presence commanding attention from the remaining onlookers. "I think this situation has been resolved satisfactorily. Master Chief Martinez has shown remarkable grace under pressure, and Petty Officer Morrison has learned a valuable lesson about assumptions and respect." He looked around at the crowd, his expression making it clear that the show was over. "I suggest everyone return to their business and remember what they've witnessed here today. Real honor isn't about public recognition or dramatic confrontations. It's about doing your duty regardless of whether anyone will ever know or acknowledge what you've done." As the crowd began to disperse for the second time, Admiral Chen turned back to Sarah. "Master Chief, if you have a few minutes, I'd like to speak with you privately. There are some developments in special operations training that you might find interesting, particularly regarding the integration of female operators into conventional SEAL teams." Sarah nodded, understanding that her quiet civilian life had just become significantly more complicated. "Of course, sir. Though I should mention that I've been out of active service for over a decade. I'm not sure how current my perspectives would be." "Experience like yours doesn't become obsolete," the Admiral replied. "If anything, the distance from active service often provides valuable perspective that current operators lack. We're always looking for ways to improve our training and operational effectiveness." Jake lingered nearby, clearly wanting to say something more but uncertain whether his continued presence was welcome. Sarah noticed his hesitation and addressed him directly. "Petty Officer Morrison, don't let today discourage you from your goals. If you're serious about special operations, use this as motivation to expand your understanding of what that means. The military is evolving, and the operators of the future will need to be more adaptable and open-minded than those of the past." "Yes, ma'am," Jake replied, his voice stronger now. "And thank you for being understanding about my mistake. I won't forget this lesson." As Jake walked away with his friends, who had remained notably quiet during the Admiral's intervention, Sarah felt a strange mixture of relief and apprehension. Her carefully guarded secret was out, witnessed by dozens of people, and recorded on multiple phones. There was no going back to the anonymous civilian life she had built for herself. Admiral Chen seemed to sense her thoughts. "Master Chief, I know this wasn't the kind of attention you were seeking. But sometimes the right person emerges at exactly the right moment. The military is facing new challenges, and we need people with your experience and perspective to help us navigate them." Sarah looked around the museum, at the memorials and displays celebrating military service and sacrifice. For years, she had visited places like this as an outsider, her own contributions unknown and unacknowledged. Now, standing next to an admiral who knew her real story, she felt a strange sense of coming full circle. "I suppose hiding was always going to be temporary," she said finally. "The question now is what comes next." Admiral Chen smiled, the expression transforming his authoritative features into something warmer and more human. "What comes next, Master Chief, is entirely up to you, but I hope you'll consider that your story might inspire the next generation of operators, both male and female, to think beyond traditional limitations." As they walked toward the museum's administrative offices to continue their conversation privately, Sarah reflected on the strange turns her life had taken. A simple morning visit to remember old friends had transformed into a public revelation of secrets she had guarded for over a decade. The confrontation with Jake had forced her to acknowledge parts of herself she had tried to leave behind, but it had also reminded her of the pride she felt in her service and the importance of the work she had done. The young sailor's assumptions had been wrong, but his passion for protecting military honor was something she could respect. In his anger and his eventual humility, she saw echoes of her own journey from certainty to wisdom, from black and white thinking to an understanding of the complex grays that defined real-world service. As Admiral Chen had said, real honor wasn't about public recognition or dramatic confrontations. It was about doing your duty regardless of acknowledgement. But perhaps, Sarah thought, there was also honor in stepping out of the shadows, when doing so could help others understand the full scope of what service could mean. The tattoo on her arm had always been more than just ink and symbolism. It was a reminder of promises kept, of friends lost, of missions completed against impossible odds. Today, for the first time in over a decade, it had also become a bridge between her hidden past and an uncertain but potentially meaningful future. Standing in the museum surrounded by the history of American naval service, Sarah Martinez made a decision that would once again change the direction of her life, though this time by choice rather than circumstance.